Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, today we're jumping straight into a really provocative piece of analysis. It uses some incredibly powerful, almost divine language to talk about something very, very earthly, bureaucratic even, border enforcement.
That's right. We're focusing specifically on the role of a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer, a CBP officer. And the source material we're looking at really zeroes in on this specific case of a dual citizen officer, maybe someone holding both U.S. and Canadian passports, for example.
And their job gets equated pretty shockingly, I have to say, to opening the gates of heaven or hell.
It's intense stuff.
Definitely intense imagery. So, yeah, we're diving into this analysis by Tyreek A Gaynor-Fray from October 2025. And it doesn't just, accept this metaphor at face value. It really scrutinizes it, digs deep. Our mission today really is to get past that initial, maybe noble-sounding image, the pure, dutiful guardian at the gate, and explore the ethical stuff, the systemic issues, the things that kind of get buried when you start using this heavy spiritual symbolism for policy enforcement.
Yeah. And you can see the initial appeal, can't you? That metaphor.
Yeah.
It works on a certain level. Thinking of the border not as just like a line on a map or a fence, but as a gate. It instantly brings up ideas of inclusion, maybe based on merit, duty.
Right, like you get access to something sacred, almost. And the gatekeeper is there to sort the worthy.
Yeah, it implies this sort of moral sorting process, that the whole thing is somehow righteous.
Gives the CBP officer this almost impossible kind of stature. But okay, let's drill down. The core critique in the analysis right off the bat is that this metaphor assigns, spiritual or moral superiority to what's actually just a job. A function of civil service and law.
That's exactly the heart of it. I mean, CBP is a federal agency, plain and simple. Its job is enforcing specific man-made laws and policies. And those laws, they change. They change with administrations. They're constantly debated politically.
They're not following some divinely inspired rule book.
Not at all. And if you look at the reality, the day-to-day of how these laws get enforced, well, the source doesn't shy away from the criticisms. Persistent stuff, like allegations of racial profiling, sometimes inhumane conditions in processing, or just, enforcement that feels really arbitrary. Depends who you get that day, maybe, or which specific rule is being prioritized.
Right, and framing the officer as heaven's gatekeeper, the danger there, as the analysis points out, is that it kind of sanitizes all that difficult stuff.
Exactly, it sanitizes it. The spiritual language becomes this powerful tool for, political deflection.
Yeah.
It subtly suggests that getting into the United States is like achieving some kind of salvation, right? A blessed status.
So if you get turned away.
The implication, even if unspoken, is that you aren't worthy. Maybe you were flawed or, sinful in some way.
Wow. Okay, but why does that framing stick? Why do people gravitate towards that kind of language for immigration control?
Well, the analysis suggests it's because it shifts accountability, and that's just easier. Politically easier, anyway. If someone's denied entry, instead of talking about policy failures like, are there enough visas? Are refugee services funded? Are the application processes just too damn complex? Instead of that, the conversation shifts towards the individual. Was that person good enough? Did they fail some moral test? So it stops being about whether, say, policy X is fair or effective, and it becomes about the petitioner's inherent worthiness.
So this way of talking about it actually discourages looking at the system itself. It protects the bureaucracy from critique.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
It turns this, potentially flawed bureaucratic system into a kind of moral sorting machine. We end up questioning the person standing before the gate, not the fairness or the effectiveness of the gate itself.
Right. And the gatekeepers, if they're seen as this symbolic angel,
then their actions, even if they seem harsh, are kind of implicitly viewed as serving some higher moral good. It totally bypasses the messy reality that everyone trying to cross that border, whether they have a visa or they're seeking asylum or they're a refugee, they're just interacting with a complex legal structure.
They're not petitioning for divine grace.
Exactly. They're navigating regulations.
Okay. That distinction feels incredibly important. And this whole critique, it gets even sharper, doesn't it? When we look at that specific figure, the analysis highlights the dual citizen CBP officer, the person who actually benefits from belonging to two nations, now deciding who gets access to even one.
Yeah, this is where the structural irony really comes into focus. It's profound. You have an individual who enjoys this incredible freedom of movement, right? Often they just got their status through birth, through paperwork. things they didn't necessarily earn in a moral sense.
Right. Luck of the draw sometimes.
Pretty much. And now they are the arbiter deciding who else gets access. They kind of embody inclusion and belonging just by existing with ghoul status. Yet their job is fundamentally about exclusion.
And that structural privilege, as the source calls it, often just goes unexamined, especially when we frame these officers purely as heroes, as public servants doing a tough job.
We miss the irony. The analysis argues that this dual citizen officer, just by being who they are in that role, highlights how fundamentally arbitrary citizenship itself can be.
Arbitrary. Explain that a bit more.
Well, think about it. Why does one person's birthplace, or maybe their parents' history, give them the right to hold two passports and the power to say yes or no to someone else's movement? Someone may be fleeing danger, or they're just seeking a better life. The analysis traces this power back not to some moral high ground or a divine mandate,
Right.
but to the random outcomes of where you happen to be born and whether your paperwork went through okay. The birth lottery, essentially.
That is. Yeah, that's a staggering thought. It really forces you, us, anyone listening, to think about our own citizenship, our own inclusion. Is that arbitrary too, in a way?
It should definitely make us pause. It forces us to recognize this whole system is built on national laws, national self-interest, and those things, by definition, create winners and losers based purely on administrative status, not inherent worth.
So the dual citizen officer is like a walking paradox.
In a way, yes. They hold the privilege of easy mobility, yet they enforce the rules of immobility for others.
And when the story we tell is just about the heroic individual doing their duty.
We miss the bigger picture. We skip right past acknowledging that the system they're enforcing is inherently complex, often unequal, and frequently involves painful exclusion. The focus stays on the person, the individual act of service, not the systemic impact of the law itself.
So we see the gatekeeper, but not the gate, or the rules that built the gate.
Something like that, yeah. We don't look past them to the actual mechanism of exclusion they're operating. And that's why this critique is so powerful. It demands a certain honesty about national power. It says border enforcement isn't some neutral, noble sorting process. It's a result of political choices, economic choices.
Okay, let's try and tie these threads together then. We've talked about the metaphor, the critique, the irony of the dual citizen. What's the source's ultimate conclusion here? If romanticizing border work sanitizes it, what's the real cost of doing that?
Well, the source argues the biggest cost is that it obscures these deep power dynamics, these systemic inequalities. Using a phrase like heaven's gatekeeper, it makes the whole thing feel personal, symbolic, which, works well for certain kinds of political stories.
Yeah, it's convenient.
It is convenient, but it completely fails to capture the sheer complexity of immigration law and policy.
It flattens it, right? Takes this deeply political issue and turns it into just an individual gesture, a symbolic moment at the gate.
Exactly. And the analysis really pushes back on that. It argues that this kind of metaphor lets us avoid the real political debates. Like, what's the role of the U.S. in the global situations that actually drive migration in the first place? What about policy decisions on guest workers? How do we ethically handle asylum claims and fund the processing?
All that gets sidelined if the only question is whether the gatekeeper thinks you're worthy.
Precisely. Those difficult policy questions become almost irrelevant.
So the analysis calls for a shift. If we're going to humanize the process,
then we have to humanize everyone involved. The source is quite clear on this. Yes, it's important work to understand and humanize border officers, their challenges, their perspectives, but we absolutely must equally humanize the people on the other side of that gate. See them as complex individuals dealing with the system, not just, abstract petitioners hoping for salvation.
Okay, so the final hard takeaway from the analysis is this: that gate. It doesn't represent heaven. It doesn't represent salvation.
No, it represents a nation making choices. Often very calculated political choices about who it allows in and who it decides to keep out.
And those choices are driven by policy, by budgets, by international relations.
Not by moral purity or divine insight.
Okay. Now here's the twist. The thing that makes this critique really fascinating, adds this whole other layer, is the author themselves.
Ah, yeah. Tyreek A Gaynor-Fray. The person who wrote this really penetrating analysis, digging into the systemic flaws, the ethical weight of being a CBP officer.
is actually trying to get that exact job.
Right. They're actively pursuing it. The source mentions they've been looking into the CBP officer role and similar jobs too. Sheriff, police officer, security guard. So this isn't criticism coming from some academic tower, completely detached.
No, it's someone looking to stand at the very gate they're critiquing.
It's deeply introspective. It's like a critique from someone grappling in real time with the nature of the power they are actively seeking to hold.
Which suggests, maybe, that the critique comes from a place of really wanting to understand the responsibility involved, not just, like, condemn the whole thing.
Possibly, yeah. It makes the analysis feel much more reflective. Like the author is wrestling with the ethical implications before even potentially taking the oath.
That creates this really interesting internal tension, doesn't it? Recognizing the moral camouflage of the metaphor while also aspiring to the position that uses it.
It's quite something.
Okay, so let's bring this full circle for everyone listening. We've seen how applying this sort of high-minded spiritual language to a bureaucratic system like border enforcement can, well, sanitize things.
Right. It hides the harsh realities, shifts accountability away from policy failures, and puts the focus onto the individual's supposed morality.
And the specific example of the dual citizen gatekeeper really throws a spotlight on the arbitrariness of the privilege involved. Challenges our basic assumptions about who deserves to belong where. So, as you go about your week thinking about all this, we want to leave you with maybe one final thought, something to mull over. If, as this analysis suggests, the authority of these heaven's gatekeepers rests on something fundamentally arbitrary like citizenship status, where you were born,
then what responsibility does a powerful nation actually have to those people kept outside its gates? Especially if, for whatever reason, those gates are seen by others as representing salvation or their only hope. How does a state ethically manage that perception, that expectation?
And maybe broaden that out too. Think about how often we hear moral or even spiritual language used to justify really complex, maybe messy, bureaucratic systems in general.
Yeah, like in economic policy or debates about welfare or even environmental rules sometimes. Does using that kind of language actually help us find better solutions? Or does it maybe more often just kind of hide the real levers of power and the political choices being made?
Definitely a lot to think about there. Okay, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time.